We are live.
We are live.
Hello and welcome to Handgun Radio. I'm your host, Ryan Machat from the wild woods of central Maine, and this is your home for all the news, information, and discussion in the handgunning world. This week, we talk with Grant Cunningham about his book, Prepping for Life. So as always, Handgun Radio is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network. Please check out the Patriot Patch Company for their awesome patches and other high-quality items. Visit patriotpatch.co for more information. And as always, you can shop Amazon using our affiliate link, firearmsradio.tv/Amazon. And Weird, if you wanted to help support Handgun Radio, how would you do it?
I would send Grant Cunningham lots of kombucha.
We had a bunch of messages that said, don't talk about kombucha. It doesn't mix well with anything.
Or, I mean, if you want to be a square baby, if you want to be uptight, you can go to firearmsradio.tv/pledge and click on HGR.
There are a bunch of different pledge levels there at the link, and we really appreciate it. So actually, before we move on, I have to talk about the recent Patriot Patch Company patch. It is Frankenstein with an AR-15 that has an AK-47 magazine and a few other different parts that don't belong, and it says Frankengun. And the first thing I thought of when I opened the envelope was, oh, it's the Savage 1R patch.
Basically, now, Ryan, to be clear for those listening at home, are we talking about Frankenstein or are we talking about Frankenstein's monster?
We're talking about the patch.
There was a book, and there was a guy named Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein. He was a doctor. He was a bit crazy, and he sewed a bunch of corpses together, and he made something called the monster.
I should have known you'd get all technical on me when I just wanted to bring up a patch.
You a big Mary Shelley fan, Grant?
No, not really.
She's terrible.
I watched Young Frankenstein the other night. Does that count?
Frankenstein!
That's right.
All right, so let's head into the week in review. Weird, what did you do this week?
I attended to a child with an ear infection.
Oh no.
Yeah, she got sick and got very, very grouchy, but I think we caught it in time. She's actually up in Maine right now. But unfortunately I did not get a chance to go out to the range.
How's your black powder revolver?
It is still in pieces. I'm going to send it to Grant.
How is it still in pieces? I've even gotten mine back together, and mine sat in pieces, and I moved from my apartment to my house, and I still have time to put it back together.
Well, you have moved. You know what hasn't moved? My black powder revolver.
Or you. You got to go out and shoot that thing.
Yeah, right now I've got absolutely no drive to do so. The bug will bite me again.
So, Grant, what'd you do this week?
What did I do this week? I had rebuilt a rifle for a neighbor who's done a whole bunch of favors for me over the years, and so I did some work and rebuilt his rifle, and we took it out to sight it in, and so I go out to my little range out here, and we start to sight this thing in, and the scope that was on it was an old Bushnell and not a really good Bushnell, and it had been it had gone on several hunting trips apparently in the wet Oregon weather, because it rains here all the time during hunting season, without the benefit of caps on the adjustment turrets, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the adjusters inside got rusted or something, because I would make, and keep in mind, we're sitting here at like 25 yards just to get the damn thing on paper, and because we'd rebarreled it and all sorts of things. And so we're at 25 yards, and 3 clicks or 4 clicks on the adjustment dial moved it like 8 inches. and so, okay, let's go 2 clicks back up. Maybe that'll get us to the center. Oh no, that took us right back where we were again. And then another time it'd go like 4 inches off to the right, and it was just crazy. So I told him to go buy a new scope.
Yeah, this is why people say spend a lot of money on the glass.
Yeah, exactly. And so he ended up with a good deal. One of the local chains had a closeout on one of the Zeiss, like the Conquest level scopes. and it was a really good deal, and it's a nice scope. It's a decent scope, and so he got in on that, and they bore sighted it for him, and he's probably going to bring it over. We're gonna make sure that it's zero this time, but that was fun. I have a bruise, on my shoulder. It's an '06, and doesn't have any sort of recoil pad. It's an older Remington BDL, which had just the contoured, like, Bakelite, I think it is, butt pad on it. No rubber butt pad, none of that kind of thing. And boy, that hurts. It's been a long time since I've shot a heavy recoiling rifle without at least a rubber butt pad of some sort. So
You said you rebarreled it. What was in it originally?
270.
Okay.
And the 270 barrel, it had been taken out again in the rain, and he had loaned it out to somebody, and it came back with a rusted bore.
Ugh.
Yeah, and it's just, well, can't do anything with this. And then, and he says, well, that's okay. I wanted a 30-06 anyway. I said, turning this into a 30-06 is like really easy. Like really easy.
I didn't know you did any work with rifles. I mean, is that just something you do every now and then? I mean, back when you were gunsmithing, you were mainly a pistol guy.
Yeah, I don't, only rarely, and only for friends or myself. So no.
Yeah.
But I was happy to do it for him, and so we got that taken care of and sighted the thing in. Now I have a bruised shoulder, and he has a new scope.
I like the fact that you bruised up your shoulder and spent today sighting it in for we got to throw away these sights.
Oh, I tell you, it was it was crazy. And the thing is, I've seen this before because I used to work sight-in days at our gun club back when I lived closer to civilization, and so every year I would work sight-in days, and I saw just some horrendous stuff come through that you could not zero. It was not possible. And so the net result was always, I think you need to replace this scope or replace these rings or do something about this barrel that's got an egg-shaped, crown on it or something.
So myself, I finished setting up my reloading in my workspace area.
Yay!
Yeah, Grant, we're going to have to do a show about, like, if someone wants to do some basic gunsmithing stuff, what are some tools they should get?
Good
That
idea.
might be an interesting discussion.
I would like to be in on that show as well.
But for right now, we'll talk about, I have my grandfather's Vice, which is important to me. I sent Weird a text message. It's actually I think it's a Columbia Vice company from Cleveland, Ohio. He had to have put this Vice on his bench in his basement back in probably the 70s. And I know it had at least been there since 89 because it was something that I used when I was a very young kid working in his basement. It has wood jaws, so it's perfect. It won't mar up any steel or anything like that. And it's perfect for what I need. And it's awesome to have a tool that was his that I used growing up.
You know what bothers me about this discussion is
What's
when
that?
you said he put it on his bench back in the 70s, right? And I'm thinking, and you're saying this like it's really old. It's old. It's been around a long time. And I'm thinking, I think I've still got a pair of socks from the 70s around here someplace.
Well, I'm sure you have some tools that
I
probably.
was playing this horn in the 70s, for crying out loud. Wow.
That might be another avenue to take that discussion, though, Grant. What do you feel about like newer tools in terms not just specifically on gunsmithing? I'm sure you do work elsewhere as well. How do you feel about tools that are like super old? Sometimes do the older tools do the job better than newer stuff?
Sometimes yes.
Grant was holding up, for those who didn't know, the horn Grant was holding up was a trumpet. What's the make of that trumpet? Give us a little lowdown.
This is a Selmer Paris DeVille from the 1960s. This was one of their professional horns that they made in the 1960s, and it's a very, very nice old horn. It's a very nice horn to play.
I do prefer, as far as instruments go. I used to play tuba. The older the horn, the better. Anything that was older than me, I'm 70s vintage. anything that was an older vintage than me was always, because you'd have thicker sidewall on the pipes, so it would resonate more. That was my
go with
opinion.
that.
What? You don't feel that way? I felt the heavier horns seemed to project better.
I feel like older guitars sound better. Aged wood sounds
well. Yeah,
more-
see, wood is a very different thing because wood ages. Metal doesn't. The problem with old metal with old horns is that valves start to leak. They develop blow by, and you get this thing called red rot in the inside of the tubes, and it starts eating into the inside of the tubing, and it gets really rough and it disrupts the airflow. And so a lot of times, unless you've got a really, really clean vintage horn, and I mean a really clean one, sometimes the vintage horns you just can't get to play well at all. So it really depends upon how well they've been taken care of and how much they've been played.
So how modern are a lot of the tools you used for your gunsmithing back in the past?
There's a mix of new stuff and a mix of old stuff.
Yeah, that's the thing I have to tackle now. Like, I don't want to buy anything I don't need, but I also want to have everything that I do need. And I'm sitting here like, oh man, where do I even start? So that might be.
I'll tell you right now, don't go looking for any. Don't go like on Craigslist looking for any pre-war CNC machines. They really weren't that good back then.
Okay.
Which war though?
1812.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're not gonna. Yeah, I'm not gonna do that.
So yeah, that'll be a discussion we'll have to have later.
So your new house because you're in the basement, right?
Yes.
Can you get a lathe down there? Have you got a big door and you can get a lathe down there?
I could probably work it out.
A milling machine?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So that would be the two things, like the two big things to think about. The good part is the entire basement no longer has the concern of like any water going down there because we have a sump pump system that was installed, a really good one that is around the entire foundation of the house. So any water that comes in just immediately gets filtered out.
So is this like tacit permission for us to start shopping and spending your money for you?
I'm not giving you my credit card number. You can send me an Amazon wish list or something.
Yeah, it's not nearly as much fun.
So Weird, what's your drink segment this week?
So I, like I said, I dropped my daughter off in Maine, and so therefore, what's in between Maine and Massachusetts, Ryan? I forget.
The New Hampshire liquor store with their prices that aren't as good as everybody thinks they are.
They are awesome prices. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Just
because you live in the People's Republic.
They're certainly better. They're better than the liquor stores here in Massachusetts. Even the ones
that
that
can
have
go to
really good
Walmart
prices.
and buy liquor.
That is true. I do miss the Maine days of buying my booze in a gas station. Not even a joke. I used to. There was. I used to buy. There was a gas station in.
My gas station has an FFL.
Do they?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, there's one about 2 miles from me that has an FFL. They have rifles and stuff.
Supposedly, a coworker of mine that lives in Connecticut mentioned that like he dated a girl from Maine, and like his big thing about Maine is that you can like Mainers buy everything at gas stations, and I went, you're not exactly wrong.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Really do like to shop at gas stations. There was a gas station in Trenton, Maine when I lived on Mount Desert Island that was a grocery store gas station. They had a full liquor license. They didn't have FL, but
yeah, it's in Trenton because there's nothing else outside of Trenton. There's no way for anybody to get anything.
They got a Walmart's.
Yeah.
But so I picked up
Continue.
just on a whim, and oh my goodness, I am so glad. This thing, it's Ransom Old Tom Gin. I've kind of been getting into the Old Toms and Jennifer. I gotta now start figuring out what the difference between Old Tom and Jennifer is, because the lines are really blurred. But this stuff comes from Washington, Grant, so it's near you. It is really, really, really good. So it is a neutral grain juniper spirit. Let me just look up. I think they actually use malted barley in it as well, as far as to make the mash. Yeah, they use malted barley in it. So it's really kind of a weird blend between like what you would think, and it's barrel aged. So it's kind of like a scotch, kind of like a whiskey, kind of like a gin. And what's really, really neat is, well, at least for me, you know, your mileage may vary, but I think a little bit above in the tasting notes, a little bit above the juniper is green cardamom, which is a spice that I'm a huge fan of. And so it's very, very light, very, very spicy, but it's got some rich notes from the wood. I highly recommend it. It's not terribly expensive. I think I paid $35 for 750 milliliters for something of this level. Pretty good price.
Not a big gin fan, are you, Grant?
No, not really. About the only spirits I really drink, I enjoy rye. I've discovered, and of course Scotch, single malt. And that's really the only thing I drink, and I don't drink very much of it. So,
Oh, thank you, Grant, for reminding me. I have a message weird from a listener.
Ooh.
For you. It wasn't actually an email message. It was on a Facebook post because I posted earlier. I said, listening to a little Merle Haggard, having a glass of bourbon. And the guy said, Andy says, enjoying a cigar and rye myself. Tried rye after hearing you guys talk about it in the drink segment. Rye, where have you been all my life?
Rye is a very, very, especially the American rye.
So yes, I was like, thank you for reminding me, Grant. I was needing to tell Reed about that.
Canadian rye is a cruel joke.
Yes. Well, so did you actually know why most Canadian rye doesn't really even contain like much rye?
Yeah, that's a strange part.
It just was the Canadians, because rye grows so well in the cold. Canadians were putting more rye, especially back when you bought whiskey and the whiskey was just corn mash.
All Canadian rye should just say sorry on the label.
Sorry.
That's like Canadian Scotch whiskey. It should just say, just kidding.
Excellent. So with that, we'll head into the main topic, prepping for life with Grant Cunningham. So Grant, it has been a while since we last had you on. We've always talked to you about books about revolvers and shooting and all this other stuff, but Steyrs, exactly. Yeah, Manuel will like that. So what inspired you to write Prepping for Life?
Well, this was a book that was in my mind for quite a few years, because I would get people in classes, and I noticed that I would get these people in classes, or I would see discussions in social media with gun people, and everybody would talk about, you know, how they're all prepared because they've got all kinds of gun, they've got all kinds of ammunition and all this kind of thing. And I would run into people who were spending, you know, $10,000 a year on training, some of it from me, and ostensibly because what they want to do is they wanted to be prepared to defend their life. They wanted to make sure that they did not die an early death. And I would talk to these people, and even pretty basic stuff about, you know, we would talk about situational awareness and what do you do, this, that, and the other thing. And it was pretty clear that once you got sort of outside of the shooting range, their knowledge of keeping themselves safe sort of evaporated. And I used to tell people, listen, the gun, and I would drill this into people's head, listen, the gun doesn't keep you safe. It's all the other stuff that you do that keeps you safe. The gun simply gives you a tool to get out of a bad situation when there's no other recourse. I mean, that's really what it does. And yet everybody sort of looked at the gun as keeping them safer. And as I sort of zoomed out and looked at the big picture of my own life, and this started like, in the mid 90s, I kind of looked at my own life and said, well, you know, if my goal is to extend my life or to keep myself from dying a premature death, there are probably some other things that I might want to do to do that. And when we expanded that a little further and said, okay, if I want to prevent grievous injury, not just my death, but grievous injury or severe risk, well, here are the things I sort of needed to do. And it became clear that there's just a whole lot of stuff. There's this big ball of stuff that you can do to keep yourself safe. And yet the problem that most people had, and certainly the problem I had, was prioritizing all this stuff. How do I fit this all in? And it didn't seem, for instance, that keeping some emergency food stocks on hand, well, how does that relate to taking a defensive shooting class? And they don't seem to really be related. But when you get out and look at it at the macro level, they're very much related. There are something that we do to prepare for a specific sort of event that we anticipate having. And when I started looking at it that way, everything just sort of dropped into place. Everything simply became a part of that total preparedness picture. And I thought, and over the years, as I've done this and I've come up with systems to do this for myself, I thought, I should really put this down in a book one of these days. And especially when I started publishing. And I finally decided last year that now's the time to do it, to put all this stuff down so that people can take a more holistic view of their personal safety and their family safety than just, oh my God, let's get a bunch of guns, and I would crazy. Here's how crazy some of the stuff is. I would talk to people, and I still talk to people today who have lots of guns, but like don't have any sort of early warning system, like an alarm or a dog or something to give them some idea that, maybe danger's approaching. And that's how bad this singular view of safety and of personal preparedness gets. If you get to the point where you got lots of guns, but no way to tell that the bad guy's about to break down your door, you've got a problem. And the whole idea of this book was to expand people's minds so that they looked at the whole of their existence rather than just individual discrete pieces of it.
Because you have the people who look at, like, what do you do to dispel the whole myth that prepping is just for like a paranoid bunch of people who are, dressed up in Army Navy surplus camo and trying to dig bunkers and stuff? How do you dispel that notion? Because, at this point in time, I'm sure to most of the general public, if you said the word prepping, a lot of them might associate a negative connotation to that.
Yeah, that's always, we have, we have television, of course, to thank for this, because they had a show on, preparedness on preppers that basically made them all look like a bunch of wackos, and a lot of them were. But the issue when I talk to people and I see their eyes start to glaze over when they hear the word prepping or preparedness, and I instead start to talk about the things that can affect them. For instance, right now, of course, in the last few weeks, there have been some horrendous fires in California. And you may have heard of them because they destroyed a lot of wine country. And Weird was probably crying. But
not a wine drinker, so I was actually
okay. There you go. If it had destroyed, well, it took out some distilleries too.
Oh yeah. Well, it doesn't matter. I was upset that it was burning people's houses down.
Well, yeah, and it burned down. I don't know, at last count, something like 5,000 houses, more than 5,000 houses, killed a whole bunch of people. And so when I talk to people about things like this, and I say, okay, what would you do? Because fires in that part of the country are sort of endemic. Every year, every fall, there are fires in Southern California. It's just that they happen to be a lot worse this year. But so I talked to them, okay, in your life, what are the kinds of things that you might face? Might you face wildfire? Well, what would you do to survive that? In as whole a fashion as you possibly could. And then, so we start talking about, well, okay, do this, that, the other thing. Here in my area, we talk about earthquakes. And in my specific area, we talk about forest fires because we've got a lot of forest fires. On the coast here in my state, we have to talk about tsunamis because they happen. And so when I start to talk in terms of real things that can happen to them, and not just this sort of pie in the sky thing, oh my God, a meteor could crash. And we're talking about the things that are plausible in that they happen, they've happened enough over whatever period of time that you can reasonably conclude that they could happen again to you. And so when we talk about these plausible events and we start looking down this whole list of plausible events, well, how would you, prepare for that? How would you deal with that? What could you get ahead of time, or what could you do ahead of time? Could you store ahead of time? What skills could you get ahead of time that would help you survive this, help you not be have your life not be tremendously interrupted by this? And so we start with that discussion. Then they begin to see that preparedness isn't this crazy thing of getting a basement rec room and storing a whole bunch of guns in it like they saw in the movie Tremors.
Movie.
But instead it's something that they can do every day. It's something that helps them maintain their lives as through an even keel as possible through really bad times. And once we start talking about that in terms of very personal things, they start to see the idea that this isn't, wild people in camo in the woods of Maine.
You just disappointed a lot of Reba McEntire fans.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I would say actually the interesting thing is I don't know if you agree with this, Grant, or not, but I kind of think the peak crazy prepper has kind of passed, because if you go like to the FEMA website, they're talking about prepping. They talk about building kits. They're talking about the kind of prepping we're going to be talking about, instead of digging a bunker and filling it up with MREs and potable water and guns and tripwires and maybe some surplus nerve gas. Instead you were talking about your area. You're talking about tsunamis and earthquakes and forest fires. For Ryan and I's area, it's blizzards. We will get 3 or 4 feet in a night, and
we're supposed to get slammed this year.
Yeah,
that wouldn't surprise me.
It's funny you should mention that, because I think for those who remember Y2K, that Y2K went a long way, unfortunately, to cementing in a lot of people's minds the idea of the prepper as a nutcase. And now I will admit, I will plead guilty to doing some profiteering on Y2K. We won't go any further about that than that.
Maybe after the show.
What's that? Yeah, well, I can tell you later. And so, I kind of sort of push people and kind of stoke those fires, because it meant I made a lot of money. But unfortunately, the whole Y2K thing put it into people's heads that only nutcases do this. Well, now we come, we're now 17 years later. And as you say, FEMA is talking about, the American Red Cross talks about preparedness now. The local power companies, if you go to your local power company website, there's probably something on it about preparedness. We're talking regularly now about dealing with life-threatening trauma. And all of this stuff is starting now to become mainstream, and people are starting to see that, oh yeah, this is normal. We should be doing this all the time.
So, Grant, I might have something you might find interesting here. Weird. I don't know if you have any memories of this, but so kind of talking about the fact that we don't get hurricanes and stuff up in here in Maine, we have snow and blizzards, reminded me of the ice storm of '98. Is that something you've ever heard about, Grant?
No.
The northeastern ice storm of 1998.
At first, I thought you were going to talk about Hurricane Gloria, which came through, I think, before you were born.
Well, yeah,
I think that was
1999.
Yeah, this is 1985. We actually got halfway decent hurricane. It wasn't that big of a deal, but for Maine, it was pretty bad.
But then
Yeah,
again, you're down in Portland. I'm up in central Maine.
yeah, that ice storm was horrible.
So the ice storm basically knocked out most of Maine for a good 3 weeks, probably.
Wow.
Essentially, it was for those that don't know what an ice storm is essentially a heavy rain where the upper atmosphere is warm enough that it's raining and the lower atmosphere is cold enough that it's going to freeze. So the trees and everything get soaked, but it freezes on contact. And so that is a lot of weight for the trees to get. And so they were, I mean, we had trees in my parents' backyard that were just like bent completely over. The tops were touching the ground. And then
so we didn't have my grandparent. We didn't have school for almost 13 days. My grandparents' house, which is where I lived at the time, did not have power for 11 days. My grandfather was not anybody you would consider a prepper, but he was a very handy person. He broke out the kerosene lanterns that he had from when he was a kid. And that's what we used for power the entire time. And then eventually they got the power up on one street next to us, and our neighbor let us plug into there and let us run the fridge and a couple lamps. But yeah, we didn't have power for 11 days. We used the snowbanks as refrigerators. Saved all our food. But you know, you don't have to live in a disaster area to have a situation arise where you may not be able to get the things you need.
You know, it's funny you should mention that, because back in 2000, I was trying to look it up here, 2002 or 2003, somewhere around there. We were living in a suburban area here in Oregon, and in fact, in a town that has the highest per capita income in Oregon. And so this is not exactly out in the wilderness. This is in a suburban area, in a very, very built up area. We get ice storms out here all the time too. And we had a particularly bad one that left us with about 4 inches of ice on everything. And here we were in a very affluent suburb, in a metropolitan area, and we were without power for a week. And that really accelerated a lot of what we did in terms of preparedness, because we didn't have a generator and all this kind of thing, and that really pushed our preparedness into high gear, because that could have been disastrous.
My grandfather went out and ordered a generator the day after he was able to get to where he needed to go to order it.
Now, the worst thing about our ice storm is that we're freezing. There's no electricity, no nothing, and for some reason, I didn't really even think about the fact that we had natural gas hot water, and I could have had a nice hot bath every night. But I didn't, unfortunately, think about that. And again, those are the things that you don't think about unless you spent a little bit of time ahead of time thinking about this stuff. What would I do if?
Well, that's actually an interesting thing. Actually, for the big ice storm, when my dad bought the house I grew up in, it's a ranch style, so it's a large basement, large first floor, no second floor, and he went and cut holes in all the floors and put in registers and put a wood stove down in the basement. And so that's what we were doing when the power went out. We had wood, and we would stoke up the wood stove and get that basement about 80 or 90 degrees and open those registers, and that would keep the house somewhat comfortable. There'd be some cool spots.
Yeah, we used kerosene heaters in whatever room we were going to be in.
Yeah. So these are the things that I think people only really think about when they've gone through them. And one of two things happens. Either you get into this denial thing that, well, it will never happen again, so I don't need to worry about it. Or it's easy to go sort of off the deep end. And there's a middle ground. And what I hope that I presented in the book is a middle ground.
So when you started writing the book, were there any things you had to learn yourself before discussing them? Was there anything you didn't, anything you realized, hey, man, I didn't really know enough about that, and you kind of had to dig deeper?
Boy, let me think. Most of the stuff was based upon what we've already done. There were some things that I had to research. Some of the when I talk about some of the threats, because I use them as illustrative illustrations of what you might face. And so, for some of the threats that I personally don't face, I had to do a little bit of research. What do people have to do? What do they have to put up with? That kind of thing. But other than that, not really. I'm fairly lucky in that I grew up on a farm, and so my skill set is such that a lot of the stuff that I need to do in terms of preparedness, in terms of survival and all that kind of thing, I learned at a very early age because that was just part of life on a farm, right? And so if I didn't have that skill set, I probably would have had to research a whole lot more. But as it was, most of the stuff that I researched had to do with the kinds of events that I don't face, like we don't really deal with hurricanes where I am. So things like that. I had to do some research on. But other than that, no. Most of the stuff is stuff that either I've done or I've personally known people who have done, and so that was actually probably the easiest part of it, is
Now,
the what to do part.
were there any specific areas that build upon like the best practices that you established in your earlier books in this book?
Yeah, in fact, one of the key concepts in this book is one that I've talked about. I think in most well, all of the self-defense books I've written, and I talk about the idea of looking at what is likely, what is possible, what is merely possible, and then that whole big bunch of stuff in the middle, the stuff that's plausible. And I talk about it in terms of states of expectation. Uh, when we look at the universe, anything can happen. I mean, I could be sitting right here right now, and uh, a a meteor or an errant spacecraft, a satellite could come down and just come through the roof and crush me dead. That could happen. I mean, it's possible, right? In the sense that the laws of physics don't prevent it. But how likely is that? And it's so unlikely that it warrants absolutely no time or energy on my part. And in fact, one of the things I mentioned in the book is the idea of being killed by a meteorite. Uh, there's no recorded instance of a human being ever being killed by a meteorite. Coming through and hitting them. It just doesn't exist. So worrying about that, that thing that's merely possible, probably isn't a good use of my time, my energy, my interest, my money, or anything else. On the other hand, we have those things that are very likely. We just last night we went through a windstorm here where I live, and our power was out for several hours, and trees down, and we lost a bunch of trees and that kind of thing. And that happens every year, several times a year where I live. And so that's very, very likely. So that's maybe something I should prepare for, because it happens all the time. And then there's that whole bunch of stuff in between that doesn't happen often enough that we can put any sort of a mathematical expectation to it, but it happens historically just often enough that we can reasonably conclude it could happen to us. And so when we look at those states of expectation, we start with the things that are most likely, and then once we're done with those, we expand to those things that are plausible, that could believably happen. And I do this both in terms of incidents, how often it happens, and in terms of consequence, how dangerous they are. What's the worst part of that could happen? And so that is a theme that's gone through all of the self-defense work that I've written over the last number of years. And so that part, and in fact, that played a huge role in the book. And there's a whole bunch of stuff where I talk about that and I go back to it all the time. So yeah, that part is consistent with some of the other stuff that I've written.
I want to add something on to that. I'm talking about for me being a huge fan of like the Mad Max movies and all those post-apocalyptic stuff and all that. But that is something you see people pop up, zombie apocalypse. That's a little bit more fantastical. But when you deal with the thing like a mass contagion or a nuclear strike or something where the idea that you're going to be walking around through abandoned shopping malls with a colander strapped to your face, possibly wearing a lot of leather, the idea being if something happened that bad that it was going to collapse all of society, for it to collapse all of society, it's going to have to kill most of the hardcore bunker in the backyard preppers as well. So the idea of, all right, as cool as Mad Max is, you're not going to see it happen, because if you get to it, chances are you're dead.
Yeah. And that whole, and one of the reasons I wrote this book was to get past the whole apocalyptic dystopian scenario that so many people have when they think of preparedness. Let's get it past that, because there are a whole lot of things right here and now that can affect our lives negatively to the point of severe injury or death that maybe we need to be focusing on. For instance, rather than focusing on some post-apocalyptic nightmare scenario, there are a lot of people running around out there with health destroying habits that maybe they should pay some attention to, right? And it's always really tough talking to people about this, because it sounds like you're being judgmental, and it sounds like you're intruding upon their personal life, which is really not the case. But when we're looking at how we're going to survive long term, what we're going to do, the fact is that we are more likely to die of a heart attack than we are a knife wielding mugger. And we're more likely to die from a knife wielding mugger than we are from North Korean paratroopers, right? And so when we look at all this stuff that can happen, I really want to focus on that far end of it that says, okay, here are the things that are real. These are the things that really happen. People die of obesity related diseases every day. People die of smoking related diseases every day. Part of survival might be starting with our own health and making sure that that's in order before we do anything else. And that I think really tends to ground people. And to a certain extent, I mean, it comes from my own issues since I hit 50. I've had issues with my weight gain, and they've gotten worse since my wife has learned to make bread in the last 8 or 9 months. And so I was doing really well. I was doing really well dropping the weight. And then my wife started making delicious bread all the time. And here I am now. I've gained everything back. And so now I have to spend a lot more time. But I realize that the extra weight that I'm carrying is going to shorten my life. So it becomes now a priority for me to do something about that. And as a result, I don't even think about Mad Max zombie scenarios. It's not even part of my radar, because I understand that this other stuff, the stuff here is a lot more important.
Well, same idea with the guys that have they've got the M1A and the plate carrier, and they've got the load bearing vest with all the spare magazines, and they've got their gun and all of that, but they're way overweight. What are you going to do? You're going to strap that plate carrier on and you're going to run around?
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of this came about and one of the reasons that I've got this sort of hard-nosed practical aspect in this book, and it really is pretty hard-nosed, is that I ran into a lot of people, for instance, who were putting together big go bags, go go bags and or bug out bags, as some people will call them. And they were getting these big, and I did this. I mean, I did this in the 90s. Okay. I'm guilty too, but I learned quickly. But they'll get these big backpacks and fill them with all kinds of stuff. Right. And then, okay, this is my bug out bag. By God, if something happens, I can put this on and go. And okay, great. Put it on, go to the end of the block and come back as fast as you can. And it's like, an hour later, they come wheezing, up the driveway. And a lot of people just don't understand that all this stuff ties together. And if you're making this sort of crazy preparations, you really have to think about your ability to implement those. Okay, great. You got this wonderful bug out bag that weighs 72 pounds. How far can you carry 72 pounds on rough terrain in the snow? Right. And most people don't think about that.
With androgynous biker gangs chasing you.
Yes, exactly. Biker gangs. With a colander over your face.
That's right.
All right. So, Grant, you hear the statement, I don't have enough extra time or cash or experience to prep properly. How do you respond?
One of my favorite sayings, and this goes for so much in life, and this comes directly from my best friend. And as he is fond of saying, don't let what you can't do interfere with what you can do. And so what happens is a lot of people will get into this mindset that, well, if I can't do the whole thing, right, whatever that whole thing is, I'll wait until I can. I won't do anything. And so what I tell people is, here are, identify first the threats you face. Identify the ways in which you can equip and prepare yourself to deal with that on some level. Pick out some discrete things and do those. And it may be only a little piece of it. It may be just a little small piece, but when you finish that small piece, you're more prepared than when you started. It might not be a whole lot prepared, but you are a little bit prepared. So if you're on a budget, well, you identify the pieces that you need first. And this is why I go into great detail to help people identify what is most important. Work on that first. And if you're on a budget, well, great. That means you make perhaps a little less progress, or perhaps it means you have to be a little more creative in terms of what you're doing. But start with something small, something you can afford to do, and do it. Cross it off your list and go on to the next thing. Don't think that you have to prepare, food storage for 5 people for 2 years tomorrow, because that's really expensive to do. Instead, start by, if you decide that food storage is one of the things you need to do, start by buying a few extra groceries every week of a kind that will keep over a long period of time, canned foods, that kind of thing. And do that, whatever it is. And it doesn't matter. If you've got the resources to do something, go into something whole hog and get it all done and cross it off your list, great. More power to you. But if you don't, use whatever assets you've got. And part of that might be looking at your life and making some hard decisions. For instance, we go back to personal behaviors. Perhaps someone is spending, I don't know, $6 or $8 a day at the local Starbucks. And Starbucks, great company, employ a lot of people, make people happy, all this sort of thing. But maybe people don't need to do that. $6 or $8 a day over the course of 12 months. That's a lot of money that people might be able to put into something more important that will benefit them longer term. At the same time, I don't want people to feel like they have to deprive themselves tremendously to do this. Make it fit in with whatever they can do, but look where you can shave some time. Look where you can shave some money and use that towards this goal. And it really does. It becomes a matter of goal setting.
I guess another thing I could say about that is for things of the know what you want and know what you need. And I like to describe myself when I'm shopping as an opportunistic predator. is when I go to the grocery store, I've got a list of what I need to bring home. Like if we're running out of milk, I need to bring home another gallon of milk because my daughter is going to need her bowl of cereal. And if she doesn't have milk in it, I'm going to be hurting. It's, it's not going to be a good day for daddy. But at the same time, I don't know what I'm going to cook for meals over the course of that week. So I'm going to just look to see what's on sale, what's being marked down. Certain things like I've got a really, really nice chest freezer that doesn't have a defrost cycle on it. And so I can put something in there and so long as I've got power, it's good forever. and I've tested this because I've dug stuff out of the bottom of my freezer and went, oh man, I don't remember when I bought this, or I vaguely remember when I bought this and it was a long time ago. Well, let's try it. And then same thing with like canned goods or dry goods or things like that keep for a very, very long time. If you see those on sale, or you can cut some coupons, or your grocery store's got a loyalty program and they're going to be saying, hey, do all of that. If you can get something for half off, buy twice as much. If it'll keep.
One of the things that I talk about in terms of food storage is that a lot of people, and this goes back to my profiteering for Y2K, but a lot of people, this is a hint, but a lot of people will want to put aside storage foods, right? And storage foods are expensive, and storage foods eventually you have to do something with them. And so what I tell people, and unless you buy a bunch of it all at once, it really doesn't do you much good. And so what I caution people to do is that if they're looking at their food storage as sort of this living entity, buy stuff that they already eat, right? Buy stuff you already eat and stuff that will keep. So, all the stuff you talked about, the canned foods, the soups, the meats, the stews, all that kind of thing. And canned food has multi-year, decade shelf life. So just, put that in and rotate it through, and so that it's always fresh, and put in stuff that you actually eat so that you don't have to go through and put together a special preparedness menu or pantry or something. Just expand what you already eat.
Yeah, if you go and buy a pallet of that, MREs or all these, I mean, there's some great, storable food options out there. And I've seen the commercials and they're good stuff, but it's also stuff I don't eat. So if I bought, I dropped $500, and so therefore I've got, a month's supply that, if we completely run if we're out of there and all I have to do is like cut down a tree in my backyard and start making a fire to heat up water to heat up these foods, or maybe I'm just soaking them and making them work. Yeah, that works. But at the same time, if disaster doesn't happen and 10 years go by or 15 years go by and I haven't felt the need to go Mad Max, well, eventually that big $500 pallet of food that I have there is just going to have to go in the garbage, or I'm going to have to go, well, I hope this will be good. It says it's not good anymore. Maybe they're lying, and maybe it'll be good when things go real bad.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because in Y2K, the big thing for Y2K for a lot of people was storing a hard red winter wheat, right? And I happen to know where there is a barn with about 4 tons of this hard red winter wheat in I guess about 30-gallon plastic barrels with desiccant and everything in it, because that's how you stored hard red winter wheat, right? And the whole idea was, oh my God, when the Y2K hits and we can sprout this wheat and eat the sprouts and grind it into flour and make all this stuff out of it, which of course nobody did, right? Normally you don't normally do that kind of thing, but they had it for Y2K, and so to this day that stuff is sitting in a barn. And I joke with the people who have it every once in a while about getting rid of it and what to do, and they'll make somebody a hell of a deal. But what do you do with 4 tons of hard winter wheat when you don't eat that stuff all the time?
Yeah, and it's the
And
same
it's,
thing.
and
Yeah,
it's that same problem.
yeah. It needs, if you're going to be doing food storage, have it be something that you eat and just buy a lot of it, and then just when you get about halfway through, replenish it.
Yep.
And that's the only way to do it. And also, by it being stuff that you're eating, that also means that it's stuff that you're going to like. It means that it's stuff that is going to not be a major problem in your system. Because yeah, you could live off of, potatoes, rice, and beans, for indefinitely, so to speak, but you go crazy.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that came out, especially in the large scale disasters like Katrina and things like that, was the importance of the psychological uh, health of the people who are going through it. And one of the things that really came out was eating stuff that is familiar. There's a reason we call stuff comfort food, right? Because that makes us feel good. It alleviates anxiety, all that kind of thing. And so what we see again and again and again in these widespread disasters are the people who are able to eat things that are familiar to them, eat comfort foods. It keeps their spirits up, keeps their energy up, of course, but it keeps their spirits up and keeps them in a good mental state to deal with all the other crap that they have to deal with. If all of a sudden you don't normally eat, I don't know, pickled turnips, and you're forced to eat pickled turnips because that was in your food storage, I think you're not going to be a real happy camper, and you're not going to deal with all the other important stuff that you need to do. And this is beyond an energy sort of thing. This is beyond mere physical strength.
Yeah, you can go. Yeah, food association, smell association. I mean, there's a lot of like aromatherapy is at the roots of that.
Yeah.
Of the psychological stuff. If the first time you're eating an MRE vegetarian omelet is when your house is dark and you're scared and you're worried about the future and there's bedlam all around, there is no omelet on earth that's going to taste worse than that.
There's no omelet in the world that tastes worse than that when you're not, when it's not cold and dark out. I don't know.
A friend of the first one I had was at an anime convention, and a friend of mine gave it to me and let, hey, let's make an MRE and get the steam going here in the middle of a convention center. And that was kind of fun. And you know what? I kind of enjoyed the omelet.
Yeah. Yeah. You wouldn't if it were.
I mean, I made an omelet this morning that was considerably better than what that was.
So, basically, situations will sometimes develop where you won't have any of your quote unquote prep gear. And it's a perfect example as to why skills are more important than actual tangible gear sometimes. What are some skills people should work on? And also, what's the kind of mental preparation that people should focus on?
I think the first thing, and this goes back to the discussion about stuff that made it forward from my other works in this book, excuse me, is the first thing is the decision that you make ahead of time that you will do what it takes to survive and go home to your family, or that you're going to do what it takes to protect your family, to protect the ones that you love. And that decision has to be made first. And this is whether we're talking self-defense or preparedness or anything else, that decision that I'm going to do what it takes to survive. And it doesn't matter whether it's a major disaster or a minor inconvenience. That decision has to come first. And I used to do search and rescue up here in the mountains here in Oregon. And the people who decided ahead of time that they were going to survive would be the ones that we would typically find, and the ones that would just sort of sit down and, oh, woe is me, I don't know, that kind of thing. So that idea that I'm going to survive, I'm going to do what it takes to survive, and it may be uncomfortable, it might be painful, it might be a lot of things, but I'm going to do it. So that decision has to be made first, that my life is worth protecting, my life is worth saving. That decision has to come first. And as I've said, that's not something that can come listening to a 15-minute lecture on being a sheepdog. That's just not going to happen. It has to be a decision that you make ahead of time that, yeah, my life is worth saving, ultimately, is what it comes down to. I think that's the first thing. In terms of skills, one of the skills that's very, very helpful is to be able to look at the situation and size up, what do I need to do from a conceptual standpoint? I need to do this. And I talk about this, I think I mentioned in the book, the idea that a lot of people will think, well, I need a generator because I need electricity. Well, electricity is just sort of a tool. It's not an end in of itself. Why do you need electricity? Oh, well, I need electricity because I need heat. I need electricity because I need to cook food. All this stuff that electricity does for us. When you think in terms of conceptually, what do I need it for? Well, I need it to do this and this and this. Perhaps there's something else that might do that job. For instance, you might not have electricity, but do you have propane? Propane can substitute for electricity in terms of heating water and cooking meals, right? Candles can substitute for electricity in making light, or flashlights can. Solar panels can substitute for electricity and in some things. So the second thing is being able to look at things, at least conceptually. What do I need to do? And drill down to, okay, this is the job that I need to do. What can I repurpose or use to do this thing, right? And sometimes that requires people to drill down further than they really understand they need to do. So looking at things at their very base level, at the very base conceptual level, I think is the next thing. I think the third skill that I would probably say is the ability to look past your own discomfort. And what I mean by that is we go back to that idea, my life is worth saving. And to do that, I might have to do something that is mentally, emotionally uncomfortable. I might have to do something that's even physically uncomfortable. I might have to do something that I would not otherwise do were I not in this situation. And I think that that's part of it. The ability to look past your own discomfort is really, really important. In terms of actual physical skills, I think it's really important for people to learn how to do things like build a fire. I think that's an important thing. Learning how to use a knife. You'd be surprised how many people don't actually know how to use a knife. I know a lot of people that carry tactical folders in their pockets that really don't understand how to use a knife, and it's kind of surprising. But how to learn even basic tools. How do you do that? I think skills in terms of being able to fix things is really important. How do you fix something that breaks down with a minimum of hand tools? How do you siphon gas? Amazingly, very few people know how to siphon gas these days. Apparently nobody grew up on a farm where you stole gas from your dad's pickup.
I had to siphon my pool this year as a homeowner.
Okay. Yeah. I got very good at siphoning gas.
I was just saying, Grant was a teenager during the gas crisis.
Actually, yeah. I mean, gas was hard to get. It was really expensive. I think it was like, 80 cents a gallon or something. It was crazy.
Whoa.
And we, on the farm, we had an underground tank. We had a diesel tank and a gas tank that my dad kept locked. And he kept the only key on him. So my only recourse to get gas for my car was to siphon it from either, one of the implements around the farm or from my dad's pickup. And so I got really, really good at siphoning gas from a 57 Chev pickup.
What were you putting it into, Grant? What was the car you were putting it into?
Let's see. My first vehicle was a 1960 Chevrolet half-ton pickup.
I respect that.
Yeah, that's not as ridiculous as I was hoping. I was thinking like an AMC Pacer or something like that.
No, my sister had one though. My sister had an AMC Pacer at that point.
So
right,
weird.
awesome.
You got a couple questions here before we wrap up. What are those?
So I think you covered a lot of this on going over horror, but let's go down to it. What are some of the things that you think people in the prepper community really do wrong?
I think focusing on the ridiculously rare scenarios, the apocalyptic scenarios. I think in a lot of terms they don't focus like 3 steps down. They focus instead of thinking in terms of I need to survive this kind of an incident and I need to start here and come out the other side. They focus on um, I need to build up my stock of MREs, or I need to build up my stock of ammunition, or I need to do this. I think that sort of so it's twofold. First of all, focusing on the scenarios that don't really happen, and then focusing too much on very, very discrete parts of it, and then drilling deep. Preparedness realistically isn't about drilling deep. It's about breadth, not depth. There are a lot of things we need to prepare for, and being 80% prepared for all of them is much better than being 120% prepared for one that's not going to happen. So I think that hyper focused, almost maniacal sometimes view of things, I think that's one of the things that a lot of preppers do wrong.
So what you're trying to say is when I see all these listings for the ICBM silos that have been converted into condominiums, that's not something I should think about buying.
No, and to be fair, I had that idea first back in about 1994, before anybody had done it, and I wish I had done it now because I would have made a lot of money.
You're gonna ask the last one, aren't you?
No, I'm not going to ask the last one. I will let the people on the Facebook group guess on what the last question I wrote down was. But how do you feel about, like, say, the different government websites in there? Again, I mentioned earlier, they're kind of getting into prepping. Do you feel that what you've been seeing that's coming off of like the standard channels is good prep work, bad prep work, mediocre? Would you improve on it?
I think in a lot of I think in a lot of cases it's mediocre, and there are certain circumstances where it's actually pretty good, particularly in terms of dealing with natural disasters. I think there's a lot of really good information out there. I think where they really fail is when they start talking about medical preparation. Um, I think that they really fail because there's way too much Red Cross first aid kind of stuff going around, and not enough here's how you stop severe bleeding, right? Which is a killer in all kinds of incidents every single day.
To drive it into the mainstay, I was in Boston when the Boston Marathon bombing happened.
Yeah.
And thankfully I was nowhere near the carnage, but one of the things is that I was amazed, after the smoke cleared, and I was starting to read the thing. I'm like, oh my God, the death count is going to be so big. Some of that was the choice of how they made their bomb.
Yeah.
Thank goodness they were idiots. But the other thing was that there were a lot of people, a lot of them soldiers, on the scene, just there attending and ready to go, who knew how to use tourniquets. And some of the big injuries that you saw from that blast were severed limbs.
Yeah.
And when someone's got a limb knocked off, they don't have a whole lot of time unless you can get that bleeding stopped.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that a lot of the medical stuff has been watered down, and I think a lot of the stuff in terms of dealing with mass attacks, mass casualty attacks, active shooters, that kind of thing. A lot of that is watered down, and I think that there are a lot better sources of information out there. But by and large, when we're talking about the natural disasters and things like that, most of the information is actually fairly good because we have a really good track record of dealing with that stuff across the country.
So, Grant, wrapping up here, your book is Prepping for Life. Where can people find your book? Where can people find more information about you? And where can people buy your other books?
Sure. Prepping for Life, the balanced approach to personal security and family safety, is available on Amazon in both Kindle and paperback formats. You can get it either way. You can also get it on the iBooks bookstore. And there are a few bookstores around the country that are stocking a few copies of it. If your local bookstore doesn't have it and you think it'd be a good thing for them to stock, tell them to contact Ingram. If they're any sort of a bookstore at all, they already have an account with Ingram because they're one of the biggest book distributors in the country. Have them order it from Ingram, and you can get it on the shelf that way. And of course, you can always go to my site, grantcunningham.com, www.grantcunningham.com, and you can get Prepping for Life or any of my other books there. And of course, my other books are also available on Amazon and the iBooks bookstore.
Excellent. So with that, we'll head into the wrap-up section and close out the show. Don't forget to shop Brownells using our affiliate link. Head to firearmsradio.tv and click the affiliate link in the upper right-hand corner. Be sure to go like Handgun Radio on Facebook and share it with your friends. And leave us a review on iTunes. Listen to all the great shows on the Firearms Radio Network, and be sure to visit the Firearms Insider for reviews and more awesome content. Be sure to check out the Firearms Radio Network on YouTube. And Weird, thanks for coming on tonight, and where can people find you?
Well, you can find me at my blog, which is weirdworld.com. You can also find me on the Squirrel Report and the Gun Blog VarietyCast.
And Grant, thank you again for coming on the show, and your website, grantcunningham.com, correct?
That is correct. And thanks for having me. It's always a lot of fun.
Yes, and we have to have you on again soon for the gunsmithing tools episode.
Ooh,
so
yeah, I'd love to talk about that.
All right, so until next week, have fun and safe shooting.